Hello everyone. As we enter the merge with a MiG-17, I'd like to share a word of caution to fellow fans of Blue Force jets like this F-100 that I'm flying today. As you may have picked up from the title card, I am talking about the Red Star Simulations MiG-17, which at this time is still in the later stages of development and will soon come to DCS in the requisite and expected 2 weeks development time frame. So I'm very excited for it, and I'm glad to see that we're getting a Red 4 airplane. Unfortunately, due to certain legal issues with how those modules are and how host countries like the current Russian government and the Chinese Communist government in Beijing approach declassification and releasing public information about military weapon systems. We're just not going to see very many advanced Red 4 airplanes as official modules, and that's pretty unfortunate. The situation isn't helped that airplanes like these, the MiG-17 and the MiG-21 don't sell as well when compared to Blue 4 jets like this F-100 or the F-15 and the like. So just as a reference, even though I'm not a MiG-17 fanboy, I will be putting my money in the pot as an expression of support to the Red Star developers, because I want to see more Red 4 airplanes in the game, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I may fly the MiG a couple of times. Let me know in the comment section if you guys want to see some content about it on the channel. But returning to the topic at hand, what I'd like to do is to put out a word of caution on engaging the upcoming MiG-17, because it is, like the F-100, a very easy airplane to underestimate. I think I have made the point in my dogfight series that the F-100, despite its relatively kind of generic stats when compared to the F-15 or the F-14 or the F-16 and the F-4 and those kind of jets, despite it losing pretty solidly to the MiG-21 and the MiG-19 on the stat cards, it can turn the tables and kill those jets when flown well. And I think that's demonstrated not just by my channel, but by others as well. So it's a good demonstration of how you really shouldn't judge a book by its energy maneuverability graph cover, if you understand the terminology there. So the same dynamic applies to the MiG-21, to the MiG-17. That is an airplane that does not look very impressive by the stat card, but as somebody who has seen airshow performer Randy Ball whip one around in a max performance turn right in front of my eyes, I'm just going to tell you right now, as having seen the MiG-17 do its thing with my own Mark I eyeballs, when it comes out, it's probably going to be the tightest turning, best performing BFM machine that has ever come to DCS as an official module. It might even give some of you flying F-22 and Su-57 mods fits, because you can read all day about the MiG-17's capabilities. You can read about Robin Olds not wanting his crews to have guns because he was afraid that they would get into dogfights and get themselves shot down. You can read that stuff, and it's just kind of one ear out the other type of thing. But when you see a MiG-17 with your own eyes execute a 9G sustained turn without even leaving the grounds of the air show that it's at, it's pretty humbling. It's pretty crazy to look at that little old Soviet jet and realize it can do that. So make no mistake, folks, it doesn't matter if you're flying the F-100 like I have here, the the F-15 or the F-16 or the Tomcat or any of those kind of aircraft. You need to respect the MiG-17, and frankly, if you have a Blue Force jet, you need to engage with a missile and stay out of its... You need to stay out of the merge. Just don't even, like my last video I did on the topic, don't go to the merge. Many of you agreed with that assessment. So stay out of the merge, period, with any airplane. But if you have to go to the merge, you get jumped, respect the MiG-17. Do not tack it and think, well, it's just this humble little 1950 Soviet jet, I should have no problem dominating it in my F-15 or my Tomcat or my Viper or my Hornet or whatever, because you will get served. Yes, the MiG-17 is not terribly fast. It's not, it doesn't have record-setting Mach 2 speed or whatever, but it can it can mess you up if you are flying subsonic and you're not paying attention. It can definitely jack you up if you attack it in a visual context and the pilot's aware of what you're doing, because again, it's easy to barge into the fight and think, well, it's just a little humbling little old MiG. I've got this high-tech, high-speed, low-drag jet. I should be able to dominate it. And no, just no. That little MiG can hold a 360 knot 7 to 8 G turn with the turn radius of a freaking number 2 pencil all day, every day. And it has a really good climb rate, retains energy very well at subsonic speeds. So again, it's very easy to underestimate this jet and to think, well, it's just a little humble Soviet thing, who cares? So that's actually what happened in real life when the US Navy pilots and F-4s flew against it during the Area 51 trials back in the Cold War, and they all lost. So make note of that historical lesson, right? Hopefully this video will get some traction and the Blue Force fans like myself can get a healthy respect for the MiG-17 before getting into a fight with one, because again, you don't want to underestimate it and think that you're just going to walk up and kill it because it's old. That airplane will ruin your day in a visual fight, and if you have to dance with a MiG-17, fight only as long as it takes for you to get out, because if you try to roll and turn and dance with one, if the pilot knows what they're doing, you're going to have a bad time. This dynamic is one of the reasons why the F-100 was reassigned to close air support duties during Vietnam, because while the F-100 is a very capable close-in turn fighter, as I think I've demonstrated, and by the way, I'm no expert in this jet. I've got literally like 13 hours in this thing. So like what you're seeing is definitely lieutenant level skill. So somebody who has like 500, 1,000, 2,000 hours in this jet couldn't really make it sing in terms of the visual fight. But even so, against a MiG-17 flown by capable people, it's gonna lose. And this dynamic, again, is one of the reasons why the F-4 Phantom was put into Vietnam in the 1960s to replace the the F-100 during the Rolling Thunder strikes. It wasn't because the F-100 was necessarily bad. It actually did pretty well in the April 1965 engagement against MiG-17s. The problem is, at that time, the North Vietnamese Air Force was relatively inexperienced. It was a brand new branch, so they had to start from someplace, right? And therefore, they were not as skilled at flying the airplane as they would be later, naturally. So they made mistakes, and 3 of them got shot down by their own admission. Now, the Air Force didn't publicly claim the kills due to some political factors, but the F-100 gave a good account of itself in that fight, and it wasn't replaced because it was bad. It actually, again, it did a good job. It was swapped to the close air support mission because going forward, the Vietnamese Air Force was going to get better, right? And as they got better with that MiG-17, getting into a turn fight with each of them would have not worked out well for the U.S. side over time. Sure, at the start, the U.S. had a significant experience advantage, but as time would go on, the Vietnamese pilots would get better, and our pilots would kind of be at the same level of skill, right? Maybe even a little less, because you'd have to rotate pilots in on the famous 6-month 100 missions north schedule. So all these dynamics meant that as the skill gap between the US and the Vietnamese crossed over and got narrower, you would see a lot more F-100s losing to MiGs because of the greater experience on the Vietnamese side. And to offset the risk of losing in the visual fight like that, you had the F-4, which had its missiles. Now, yes, the tactics and training were not really where they should have been. U.S. pilots were not well trained in how to maneuver and engage their missiles with these aircraft. They weren't trained to do anything except static intercepts, which is a conversation for a different day. But the bottom line here is, with the F-4, as the Vietnamese pilots got better, U.S. pilots could still stay out of the merge with these kind of standoff kind of weapons, right? With the Sidewinder, with the Sparrow, and an F-4C crew could engage a MiG-17 without needing to do this kind of loop-de-loop
craziness that you see me doing here. So also another issue that you will find with the F-100 is when you do get into close range dogfights, you have a much greater risk of losing control. And if you go out of control on the peacetime range or whatever, that's not a good time. But if you have peacetime rules, you can probably recover. If you go out of control in combat and you get hit, you're not just fighting your bandit, you're also fighting the SAMs, you're fighting ground-based AAA, so you're also putting yourself at greater risk too when that happens. And the F4, even though it was a faster airplane, was also safer to fly as well. So not to say that it didn't have issues with adverse yaw either, but again, an F4, all things equal, would be a safer plane to fly in combat than an equivalent F-100. So these factors all came together, plus the logistics of needing to keep airplanes engaged in multiple theaters in Southeast Asia, including Laos and later Cambodia, that led to the F4 taking on a lot of the jobs that the F-100 had at the start of 1965. That said, all of this is to say, essentially, that when you have a Blue 4 airplane, you need to engage from a position of surprise or leave. Don't try to turn fight with a MiG-17. Don't jump into that fight thinking, hey, it's going to be a cakewalk because I'm in this high-tech jet and he's in that old, Soviet bucket. Not going to happen. For some reason, maybe it's just lingering Cold War jingoism, but a lot of Blue 4 kind of fans tend to poo-poo MiGs and kind of knock them down, thinking they're kind of cheap and old and Soviet and all those things. I'm just going to say right now, if that's your attitude, you probably need to do some reading, because these airplanes will ruin your day. As you can see here, I'm having a hard time fighting a MiG-15, and this is a generation, half a generation behind the MiG-17 that we're going to get. So thanks for tuning in. I think we'll wrap the message here. Y'all get what I'm putting down here. Leave a note in the comment section if you disagree. We'll have some informed debate and discussion about the topic at hand and how excited we all hopefully are at seeing the MiG-17 come to the game. Once again, thank you all for tuning in. If you like my content, consider subscribing, and that way you'll be notified when I post my next video, and we'll see you in the next one.